Hello, everyone, and welcome into DC Talks. I am your host, Drew Kreisman. With me is my brother, Ira Kreisman, and on this episode, we continue our conversation on Secret of Nimh by Don Bluth, and lots of other people. He's just sort of the main creative director thereof. When last we left our heroes, Mrs. Brisby had visited the great owl. Lots of things that reminded me of how scared I got when I was a kid happened.
Yep.
And I learned what the Lee of the Stone means, which was fun. We had an educational part. Yeah,
that was good.
Always good to learn. And we also got a new goal, right? A specific goal. The owl told her, go to the rats. The ones in the bush? Yeah.
Yeah, the ones. But I don't know any rats.
Yeah.
In the rose bush, by the farmhouse.
Yeah, well.
Yeah.
It's an RPG quest.
She's about to go on her third quest.
I will say it's rude that he didn't offer to upgrade her equipment. He didn't give her a new cloak or anything. No. She does have that one cape, which does a pretty good job of whatever, but it can't be much more than a +1.
Right, well, and she's had that from the beginning.
Right.
I will say,
gear. Yeah.
I do think she's getting a little more bold, a little more confident.
So you're saying she grew much more in experience. She got a lot of experience points from her visit with the owl. So you didn't need to get a new fancy sword or anything because she's grown in her class of badass mom by several degrees. Right. Yeah.
And she is about to get her magic item here in a bit.
Right, yeah.
So it is the next morning. The tractor has not restarted, so Farmer Fitzgibbons, he probably has to go down to the co-op and get a new fuel line. And while he's down there, he's going to meet some folks he needs to talk to anyway, and how are you, and so on and so forth. So we're safe from the tractor for now.
Hearing voices out in the field. No, it's a different movie.
Noises. I said noises. Darn
tractors.
Mrs. Fitzgibbons is doing the laundry out front, putting it on the line. We can see the massive form of the cat drag. This is a huge cat.
Yeah.
This is a massive
It's gotten bigger
cat.
since the last time we saw it.
Yeah.
It's like... there's this great video on the Final Fantasy Union page about the 4 fiends and the 4 epic battles, and every time you come up against different enemies, there's always this 4, and they get increasingly difficult each time. And it's a really interesting trope that series is established, and I think Dragon, the cat,
does all that. 4 fiends. He's chaos.
That's right. Every time you see him, he's leveled up a little bit. He's bigger, he's scarier, meaner. It's another boss fight, another boss encounter.
Right now, he's sleeping in front of the front steps, which I think is a nice hint as to what has happened off screen, and I'll get to that in a moment.
Also, if you show me too much of a cat in a thing and never show it sleeping, I will dock you points for realism.
Excellent point.
Yeah.
So we see Jeremy, and he has gotten into a dressing gown or a robe of some kind in the laundry that Mrs. Fitzgibbons is doing. He's trying to hide.
He's got a cloak now.
Yeah, he's got his
+1 to stealth.
Oh, jeez. And he needs all the +1s to stealth he can get because he is not very clever or hidden. So he makes his way across the yard. He does not try to go around Dragon at all. He has to trip over Dragon's paw, start to almost sneeze.
Oh, boy. He's good at this. Really, really good at this.
He's not at all good at this. He's extraordinarily clumsy, but it's hilarious.
Yes.
So he's calling out for Mrs. Briz, and we see Mrs. Brisby on the sort of the brick circle around this magnificently intense rose. This is an intense freaking rose bush. The branches are huge. There's thorns everywhere.
Right.
I've had rose bushes. I've been poked by rose bushes.
Sure.
This is a dangerous frickin' rose bush.
Yeah. Again, kind of like the cat or the tractor. It's hard to say that they're villains necessarily.
Right.
But they sure are made to look very intimidating, especially through the eyes of our hero.
And so she sees him and she says, Jeremy, what on earth are you doing? And he goes, shh, I'm in disguise.
I'm doing spy stuff, lady.
And she's not having it. She says, Jeremy, please, not now. I'm trying to find the entrance, and these thorns are very dense. So he, of course, says, oh, let me help you. And he tries to climb into the bush, and he shouts, and she grabs, I guess he tries to jump, and the robe he's in hangs onto the bush and brings him back down. And she gets physical with him. She grabs him around the beak. Will you be quiet? You're going to get us killed. Which is, again, she's kind of leveled up.
Yeah.
She says, I've got to find Nicodemus before the farmer gets the tractor fixed, right? So just reiterating what the quest is.
Right.
And he still wants to help. Oh, I'll keep a lookout. And he tries to fly. But of course, the rope, the robe thing he's hiding in is still attached to the rose bush because the thorns are very dense. So he falls and he's hanging upside down. She reiterates, you're going to get us both killed. And he says, I don't see anybody coming. Because he's a lookout, right?
Yeah. There's a great line in The West Wing where Toby asks Josh if he was followed by the press, and Josh says, no, I checked. And Toby says, you checked. That's great. You checked. Like, no, I looked. I don't see anything. Well, excellent news then.
So she says, if you really wanted to help me, you would go away. And he says, well, that's very brave of you, Mrs. Briz, but I can't leave you alone here. Why, if anything were to happen, think of the children. And Mrs. Brisby is no dummy. She knows she's got to get rid of this goon, and he's given her opening.
Yeah.
So she says, Jeremy, someone strong should be protecting my children in case that tractor starts up again.
Yeah.
And he goes, oh, yeah. Hey, how about me?
Hey.
And she bats her eyelashes.
I know, right? I told you earlier she was flirting with him. Not again. There's many levels of flirting. Flirting with somebody doesn't always mean you want to hook up with them or make out with them or be boyfriend and girlfriend or any of that stuff, right? There's just a little bit of, I'll use friendliness and maybe a bit of manipulation to a young man who wants to think that he's big and strong and important and that it was his idea. And I'm not going to break down any of that for him when it's going to work in my favor.
Right. And she's got to get him out of the way or Dragon's going to wake up and eat them both.
Right. Also, I don't think she'd be grabbing him by the beak or batting her eyes if this wasn't so important. You know
right.
What I mean?
Absolutely.
There's a certain, as she just mentioned, she's on a time crunch.
So she says, oh, would you? And he's like, yeah, this would be great practice. Girls are going to love me if I'm great with kids. And she says to him, whatever you do, don't tell them where I am. And I remember questioning this as a kid, like, why do you not want them to know?
Sure.
But seeing how the boy, not Timothy, the other boy.
Will
Wheaton's character.
Will Wheaton.
Not Timothy, the other one.
Right. The boisterous one who was fighting with Auntie Shrew, and I've forgotten his name as well.
Right. How he wanted to go out and look for her. She knows that if her kids think she's in trouble, they might try to come out to the rose bush also.
The older ones are just old enough to do something that stupid. I think that's right.
He agrees. He's about to leave and he says, wait, hang on. I don't know where you live. And she says, out by the big stone in the field. And then we get this comedic thing where he's like, don't worry about it, Mrs. Briz. I love kids. Kids love me. Kids love me. And I love kids. And he's dancing and goofing off, and he trips over Dragon, the cat, who sort of sleepily accidentally grabs him around the robe. And then he's got allergies to cats, so he sneezes and launches himself like a cannon into the field. And we get the humans never notice these things punchline to this story, which is Mrs. Fitzgibbons coming and grabbing that robe and saying, Dragon, you lazy kitty, go catch some of those rats out in the barn. I've never seen a cat sleep so much.
Which, come on, lady.
Well, yeah, first of all, cats sleep all the gosh darn time. But this cat in particular occasionally has help sleeping. And I think this is a nice bit of foreshadowing to one of the most dangerous adventures Mrs. Brisby goes on in this whole movie.
Yes.
So Mrs. Brisby finds a lever attached to like a leather cord or something, and she pushes it, and this door opens. And it's an interesting door because it's not a solid door. It appears to be a door made of leather or cloth. It's got these thick edges that maybe help seal in, I don't know, whatever the rattiness of this cave she's about to go down.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. So it opens up, and once she's inside, we're definitely in fantasy dungeon world. The wind blows or whispers or sighs.
It howls, sir.
The lights flicker. These vines move on their own. Why?
Right.
Does electricity make vines move on their own? Did electricity give these rats superpowers?
Yeah.
Is this like a defensive spell?
Right. And there's a lot of like weird lighting, and like you mentioned, the flickering or whatever, and sometimes there's like brilliant weird colors that we haven't seen all film, pinks and greens and blues depending on where we are, and it's mostly in dark. It's mostly, shadows, and we're getting outlines of things, but for a moment the entire background will be this bright color, and it's really amazing.
And there's a lot of just stuff in this rose bush.
Yeah.
There's a big circular stone that was maybe, I don't know, part of the planter at one point, but it's all carved in interesting designs. There's a spot where she comes to like a carved face, and it looks like a demon face, and then it lights up bright red. What is that thing? Why is it? What is it doing there? Why is it there? Is it
you nightmares?
I guess. I have. Some of this doesn't make any sense, which is fine. But yeah, there's just all these weird pathways. It's like a fantasy dungeon. It's an RPG dungeon,
right?
And there's going to be like a line of toy soldiers at one point. Why are they there?
Right.
Did the rats like them, and did they get lost at some point? Did they steal them? Are we in some forgotten cellar? No idea. Maybe it doesn't matter, but I do wonder.
Yeah, I think it's just kind of cool, random, weird world building, but yeah, lots of questions.
So she makes her way slowly through this path. She gets past all this scary stuff, and suddenly we're in this area where the light is shining down into the rose bush or the dungeon, and it's all of a sudden bright green. So it was all dark and scary and red lights and flickering electricity, and now it's bright green, and there's these sunbeams coming in. It's all pretty pastel. I don't see any roses in the background, but I think, lilies and such. Mm-hmm. So this is a hell of a rose bush, is I guess what I'm saying.
Yeah, sure. Right. Yeah, right.
And she goes through another doorway, and now I think we're going down this sort of spiral ramp. And then all of a sudden, it's dark, and there's red backlighting, and a lightning-powered spear with several barbs coming off the side is swung down and strikes the floor in front of her. And what the hell is going on?
Right. And again, this is one of those things that scared me when I was a kid. This was pretty intense, pretty horrifying, and dark. But, I was able to handle it. I was fine. I think I'm fine. I feel fine.
And the rats are obviously much bigger than the mice. So just this big dude, and he's all in shadow except his eyes are bright white, and he's got this lance. He's a dragoon, I guess.
Yeah, totally.
And he's got lightning materia on his spear.
Yeah.
Again, some of the powers that the rats have, they can't just be because they're stealing electricity from the Fitzgibbons. And so there's a mystical, otherworldly quality to what's going on here.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Now, he doesn't actually hit her with the spear ever, but he chases her off, he scares her, he stabs her cape at one point.
Yeah.
Which is really rude. And she's being held up by a vine at one point, and he cuts it so she falls into the water, and she runs away, and he chases after her, and he stops at one point. And so I think it's pretty obvious that he didn't want to hurt her, but it is his job to scare off whatever other intelligent farm animals decide to try to get into the rosebush.
Right.
So she's back at the entrance. She's been chased off. And suddenly there's this limping shadow on the wall. And it does that thing where it's, oh no, another scary whatever. And it turns out it's just Mr. Aegis. And Mr. Aegis has a crutch and a cast.
Yeah. Dr. Bartlett. What happened to your leg?
So Mrs. Brisby had tried to tell the rat who attacked her, I'm here to see Nicodemus. Are you Nicodemus? Please, I need help. And got nothing from the rat who we will find out is called Brutus.
Yeah.
But now it's somebody she knows. And this is another interesting scene where the characters are talking past each other. She's finally like, I don't have to respond to everything he says. I can explain myself too.
Yeah.
Like I can do my thing. So she's saying, oh, thank goodness it's you. And he says, how in thunder did you get in here? The plow has come early to the field. And he says, you had better march straight back out the way you came. Again, treating her like a child.
Yeah.
She says, I can't take Timothy out. He knows that. And he says, you need to explain what you're doing here. I must see Nicodemus. The owl told me to see Nicodemus. And that's what turns Mr. Aegis around. He says, well, yes, perhaps you should. The owl, you said? What are you talking about? And I feel like at this point, she is looking kind of proud of herself. She sort of leans back. She's being a little bit coy, but she's going to tell him what she did because I've done this and you sure haven't done this. I went to see the great owl. And he is flabbergasted.
Yeah.
The owl. You say you saw the owl? Yes. And he said I should ask for Nicodemus.
Which is like, also, how else would she know that name? Which is
right.
Pretty rad, too. So she's gone from, like, really never having his attention to all of a sudden. She has so much of his attention. He's saying what she has said over and over and over again. He keeps repeating it, right? Because he's just so flabbergasted at what she is telling him. And it's pretty great how quickly that happens.
And we had talked last time about how maybe you don't need that scene with the great owl narratively, but maybe Nicodemus knew the other rats would not listen to her if she had not passed this other test.
Right.
You know, if she didn't have the blessing.
Send her on a quest. Yeah. Arthur has to pull the sword from the stone before he can actually start doing anything. People have to think you're legit, right?
So Mr. Aegis is sort of turning around on this. Yes, I know Nicodemus. She says he lives with the rats. More specifically, says Mr. Aegis, he is the leader of the rats. And she says, you know him? Like, she's focused. We're going to see Nicodemus now? Right. But Mr. Aegis is still caught up with the other thing. No one has ever seen the owl and lived to tell about it. Now, that strikes me as odd also, because why would anybody go to see the owl if nobody has ever seen the owl?
Right. This, in my head canon, is a mythology that the owl has created. Because he's sick and tired of everyone coming to his tree to ask him how to solve all the... He did that for years. How old is this owl? He's the great owl. He's the leader. You know, he's been doing this for... And this is magical life. So I'm going to say 1,200 years.
Right. Yes. You know? Long enough to be the great owl.
Right. He'd like to retire. You know.
So he spreads a rumor that the great owl eats whomever comes to ask him a question, unless it's a really good question.
Right.
And then you have the protection or whatever.
You let certain friends know here and there, like, look, if it's really important, send someone. But still scare them and stuff. Like, tell them I'll eat anything after dark or whatever. You know, just like, build it up.
So she reiterates, can you take me to see Nicodemus? And he says, all right, yes, I can do that. But for your sake, I hope you're telling the truth. Like, God damn it, Mr. Aegis.
I just made all that up, buddy.
Yeah. So he says, all right, come on. And she says, what about the large rat at the entrance? I can't go back there. And Mr. Aegis just waves it off. Oh, that's just Brutus. Follow me.
Oh, well, I guess now that I know his name, it's totally fine that he almost killed me a couple times. Scared the absolute crap out of me. What the hell, man? Brutus. How great is that?
So we get a scene from Nicodemus's point of view, which is interesting considering we're about to actually meet him. I'm not sure this is an interesting narrative choice, but it does allow Nicodemus to narrate the situation, to sort of reiterate the situation.
Sure.
And to introduce our villain. But he does it by addressing Jonathan. says, Jonathan, your wife has come at last. Perhaps now I can repay you for your kindness to me. Yet Mrs. Brisby, who served the rats of Nimh far more than we her, Jenner, I fear, may do her harm. He is consumed by a lust for power. Thus far the amulet has remained safely hidden, but if he finds it, heaven help us.
That sounds bad.
So we've seen the amulet before, but now we're being introduced to it as an item of importance. We're being introduced to Jenner,
right,
who wants the amulet and who has a lust for power.
Yes.
And we're seeing more of Nicodemus. His goal in this seems to be to protect Jonathan's legacy, protect Jonathan's family, as much as it is to get the rats to what we'll learn is Thorn Valley, the great plan, or the plan, whatever it is. So we get back to Aegis and Brisby, and they're going down this ramp, and she says, "Forgive me, I just noticed you're limping." So she, again, is showing concern for others, not just focused on her own thing. Right. And he says, "That's none of your affair." God damn it.
Fine.
What a jerk.
I hope you fall down then.
And I do like Mr. Aegis. I think he's a good dude. He's just so focused on his thing.
Yeah. And grouchy all the time. Just gives off that sense of someone who, again, just been doing this forever.
Yeah.
Is so tired. Doesn't have time for any of the niceties, any of the small stuff. Just get to the point and leave me alone.
So he, again, treating her like a child. Now, to what you are about to see and hear, you must swear absolute secrecy.
So, madam, do you know what a secret society is? Have you ever joined a cult before?
And she says, "Yes, I understand." "Swear it. I promise. If any of this ever got out, we'd have humankind bulldozing their way down here to blow the place apart. And did you really think that Mrs. Brisby was going to go tell the farmers about you?" But whatever.
Yeah, I know.
She asks, "Is it always so dark?" And he says, "We're down 3 feet."
Whoa.
Which, fair enough. For rats, that's got to be
a
long way. But then the Christmas lights come on. They've got all these little twinkle lights.
Yeah.
And so, again, there's all this stuff down here, these toy soldiers. I think a kazoo is hanging from the ceiling at one point.
Yeah.
Just a lot of junk, maybe knickknacks, maybe things the rats thought were pretty.
Mm-hmm. A lot of repurposed stuff, which is why I sort of keep coming back to it as a steampunk idea. Even as you were describing the door, right? It's like they've just repurposed whatever was around and turned it into what they need and created a little society out of it, and it's really cool.
So they're walking down this hallway, and there's these toy soldiers lined up on either side, and if you've seen the movie before, you know what to look for. There's a rat pretending to be a toy soldier, just like in the ranks and wearing the hat, and they don't notice him, and they keep walking.
It's funny that you mentioned you know what to look for. I was thinking recently about those like early Castlevania games, how you've got a certain kind of muscle memory if you've played them. You know where to check the wall for the hidden secrets, right? You'll just do it without necessarily even knowing. And I found myself on rewatch doing exactly that. I was like, oh man, it's just ingrained in me. I forgot. I didn't remember it, but clearly I did, right? Like it was in there somewhere. And the second it happened, I was like, oh yeah, this is that part. But I'm sure there was a first time where you miss it. Presumably. I don't know. I was 5 or whatever.
Right, yeah. I certainly didn't notice the first several times I watched.
Sure.
So he sneaks up behind them. Mrs. Brisby's just talking about how beautiful the whole place is. And he's like 20 feet tall compared to them. And he rears up and
massive,
he swoops down and he grabs Mr. Aegis and covers his eyes from behind and says, "Reveal thy name." And Mr. Aegis says, "Justin, you featherhead." Get your hands off me. It's the high school buddy who doesn't know how to keep his hands to himself, who thinks it's hilarious to say, "Guess who?" and put his hands over your eyes.
Yeah, right.
Which I never liked.
No.
But I do like Justin. On the other hand, I will say that Justin and Mr. Aegis are excellent foils for each other.
Yes.
So I find them both annoying in different ways, and the way they sort of balance each other out is really nice.
Yeah. I was for whatever reason, don't ask, listening to our Chrono Trigger episode the other day, and we talked about Marl and Luca as a kind of Kirk and Spock of that universe, and there's a Kirk and Spock. Justin has big Kirk energy. He also reminds me a lot of Baloo.
Baloo and Bagheera.
Exactly. Baloo and Bagheera are the Kirk and Spock of that universe, right? And so I think there's a bit of that, and I think as we were just saying, there is a bit of Spock to Mr. Aegis, where it's just like coldly logical, and you almost feel like Spock has this like built-in excuse or whatever.
Right.
Like, he has to be that way. You're just being a dick. But yeah, big Kirk and Spock energy from these two.
So Justin apologizes. I'm just goofing off. It's just a joke. No harm. And he explains the meeting's already in progress. Mr. Aegis is like, what is the meeting about? But Justin is distracted because there's this pretty mouse here. Who, may I ask?
It's like Edgar Figaro energy. Oh, a pretty lady.
So Mr. Aegis explains, this is no stranger. My dear, may I present Justin, the captain of the guard. And Justin looks very proud as Mr. Aegis says that.
Captain.
And then he introduced Justin, Mrs. Brisby. And I think that he is even more taken by the name than by her looks.
Yeah.
Not Mrs. Jonathan Brisby. It is an honor and a privilege, milady. And Mr. Aegis has no time for this. He's just rolling his eyes. If we could dispense with the formalities.
Yeah.
He says, how beautiful. Or no, excuse me, she says, how beautiful. And he says, ma'am. The lights. They're quite lovely.
Oh, right. Yeah. No, I knew right away that that's what you meant.
We get a little backstory here. He says we've had electricity for 4 years now. Mr. Aegis corrects to 5. And she says, oh yeah, Jonathan often spoke of electricity. And this is, I think, particularly interesting. Justin says, for all that he's kind of a goofball.
Yeah.
He says, but you see, our shame is that we're stealing it from Farmer Fitzgibbons. So there is a part to this. When I was a kid, I didn't understand what it meant to steal electricity. Everybody has access to it. You just got to hook up to the grid, right?
Flip the switch and the lights come on.
There it is. So I think what I remember from the book is that part of what they wanted to do was be self-sufficient. So that's why they're going to go out to Thorn Valley.
Sure.
They feel like they are mooching off society in a way, because that's what rats do. They have to steal from whatever's bigger. They're scavengers, and they don't want to do that anymore. They want to be upstanding members of society or whatever, as a metaphor.
Right.
And so it's interesting to me that the heroes of this story are so set on, we are stealing electricity from the farmers, and we've got a plan to change that, and the stealing will stop. So I think that part of the theme, the theme of this part of the movie, is that it is wrong to only take from society.
Yeah.
And that you have to also be able to fend for yourself isn't quite right, but it can't just be living off the spoils of it.
Right. If you can't offer something, at the very least live sustainably, right? If there's no way to contribute, at the very least, yeah.
Which is interesting to me because, it's set on a farm. Farmers aren't really self-sustainable, but they definitely produce a thing that is important to society.
Right.
And so that they're almost presented as, because they're in this elaborate clothes and such, they're almost presented as oligarchs in that they're stealing resources from somebody else and living this very comfortable life.
Right.
I don't know if that's what it was meant, but that's how I'm seeing this part of the society. So as they're talking, they walk down this path, and there's this lantern hanging next to a waterfall, and the mice get in, and Jenner sort of pushes it off and then runs and jumps and gets in it. He's very athletic. It's almost like when you see the people who can push the boat off the dock and then jump into the boat without tipping the whole thing over.
Oh, yeah.
Like you said, it's repurposed. There's this whole sequence of them going down in this glass elevator, this lamp that's been converted into an elevator, and it goes down next to the waterfall and plunges into this pool and goes down through the pool. into a secondary pool, and then there's this airlock, and all the water drains out, and the lamp / elevator remains watertight the whole time, and they're able to have this conversation. It's really interesting. I think that goes back to your insistence that this is a sort of steampunk story.
Yeah, it really feels like it in a lot of ways. Also, the moving through all of this space, all of the traversing while having these conversations, again, feels very West Wingy to me, very walk and talk.
Interesting.
And very sort of grounded in a bit more realism, as much as we can be, with the talking animals and the magical lightning spears and stuff. We talked about even sort of the animation style, where in certain, say, whatever, Disney things or whatever, you might have a lot more movement of the characters, a lot more clarity on the space, and they'd move around in one or two, but much more static areas. And this is like slow walking through several different environments as the conversation is going on, which I think is really, really interesting. So, yeah, it just sort of animated as though they were people.
Right.
Doing this thing. It's just that we understand that the space is really small. But after a while, like, your mind just sort of adjusts to it in a weird and interesting way, too, where you start just thinking of it, this is their world, and this is the size of their world, right?
Yeah.
It's pretty interesting how that works.
Sort of scale yourself to their size in a way.
Right.
And the humans are giants, and the tractors are natural disasters.
Right, exactly.
Magic the Gathering, sometime in the next 4 or 5 sets, is going to go to a world of animals, of small animals. They're going to call it Bloomborough. And it's, sapient mice. And I'm really looking forward to it because of movies like this and my experience with them.
Right.
They're walking through this big hallway. There's a big grain storage, it says in all caps in the background. Again, just sort of another world building hint.
Yeah.
Right. They're collecting food. They're storing food, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
There are flickering lights all over the place. I don't know why they've got screens everywhere. I don't know if they think it's a cool aesthetic, or if they don't know how to make their lights just stay on.
Right. Yeah.
But they're having this conversation. Mr. Aegis says, "So why did you send for me again?" Because remember, he lives out in that combine that's constantly exploding. Mm-hmm. And Justin explains, it's Jenner. He's at it again. He's before the council now. This time, he's attacking Nicodemus openly. Mr. Aegis says, and the plan, no doubt. Nothing will come of it. It'll pass. And Mr. Aegis says, beware, boy. He's dangerous. So Justin feels like, I called you here because he's before the council, he's attacking Nicodemus, but nothing will come of it. Then why did you call for Mr. Aegis? I think Justin knows that maybe this is a little more serious this time.
Yeah.
And he wants Mr. Aegis's cynicism, his grouchiness there to help counteract Jenner's villainous monologues.
Yeah,
he's
sometimes you need that, right? He is. Oh, yeah, he's a good talker, isn't he? Great voice. I was not surprised when I went on the IMDb page and found he was a theater actor. I was like, yes, I'm sure that voice went all the way to the back row.
So Mrs. Brisby, apologizes. I'm sorry to come here at such a bad time. And Justin says, no, sweet lady, you are welcome here. And Mr. Aegis looks over his shoulder with the most give it a rest look an animated mouse could ever have.
I know. It's great.
And this is when Justin says, we tend to take ourselves a bit too seriously, which I really appreciate.
Yeah,
They're approaching the council chamber, and you can hear Jenner's voice echoing down the hall and through the door.
Oh, man.
The plan is nothing but folly. A doddering old fool's fantasy. Nicodemus would have us destroy this colony, only to lead us to starvation in some wilderness.
I know a politician when I hear one.
They approach the door, and Mr. Aegis says, wait, listen. And he listens at the door for a while. Crafty old man that he is. There's some back and forth beyond the door. Moving to Thorn Valley is a good plan. And he says, "Fie!" Which I didn't understand as a kid.
Right.
F-I-E exclamation point. Fie!
He got folly, and there was another one in the first sentence that I was like, this guy's
Doddering old
making...
fool.
We're doddering. There it was, yeah. I remember as a kid being like, this guy speaks another language.
He says, we have everything we need right here, which is back to that, we've got a comfortable life. We've got everything we need. Justin does not have the subtlety of a Mr. Aegis. We're not going to stand outside the door and listen. He says, well, come on,
He's going to reply to the Twitter comment.
Right, yeah. He replies to every Twitter comment.
Yeah. Justin's a reply guy for sure.
Come on, you suspicious old goat. And he picks up Mr. Aegis by the shirt collar and opens the door and drags him through. And Mr. Aegis is furious. Like, I'm pretty sure he threatens, he's like going to hit him with his crutch any moment now. But Justin drops him and they continue on. The counter argument to Jenner is, if we stay here, humans are bound to discover us. They'll destroy us on the spot. And Jenner's response is, not if we got them first.
Okay. What?
He means war. We'd be outnumbered. There are too many of them. Jenner says, hear me. The Thorn Valley plan is the aspiration of idiots and dreamers. And now we're in the room and we can see him. The floor is polished. There are seats on either side of this big audience chamber. There's like balconies and catwalks with more mice. They're wearing robes. They look like, senators or something, Roman senators all having this argument.
And like we walked into this place through a thorny bush like this. Right. Right. But it's so great how, I don't know, believable it is.
Yeah. It really is. It strikes me as the argument of people in a position of power who are trying to decide on what's best for everybody next and not worried about anything else. Like, so the tractor's starting up, this entire ecosystem that lives in the field is about to be destroyed. That's not us. We're doing this other thing. They are removed from the rest of society.
There's a Roman senator. You mentioned the Senate, and there's of course all those stories. Plenty of them. Pick one. Lots of them from movies and television, and actual real life, presumably. I assume they're drawing them from something. On how out of touch the Senate, and of course we know plenty of empires over the years, but there's, I think, sometimes a tendency to say, well, don't have a king, don't have an emperor. If you have a Senate, then problem solved, right? Elected representatives of the people, but they can become very distant and secluded and detached from us, we see.
Right.
So, preaching to Americans like, dude, we know. Yes, they're very detached from the lives of everyday real people and what they're concerned with. And that's,
Jenner is a striking character. He's tall. He's kind of gray and black. He wears a tunic and a big cape that he swirls whenever he can. Man, he swirls that cape. And his eyebrows are almost a character in and of themselves. They are massive and they are expressive. I don't think they're always attached to his face.
Right.
He's got a little goatee
of anything else going on.
Yeah. He is absolutely the image of a villain, and the voice actor is amazing. The animation is amazing.
The pointy finger. He has a very pointy finger.
Yes.
Great, memorable, and he's very charismatic. I think it's interesting to make him, even though immediately we know we don't like this guy, we're on the opposing side. There's never like a point where you're like, oh no, he turned on us. Like, he's introduced as the villain. There's no
right,
but not as someone you can necessarily immediately dismiss, or someone where you're looking at the other people in the audience going, why don't they see this guy's clearly full of it? Like, he's commanding the room. He's making a strong argument. There's all those theories about listener attention, how so much of it is your body language and the way you command the room and just the way you speak to your audience that can get you so much power, really. And we see it here with this character. And very memorable, again, performance, but that's all the way around, right? From the animating, the writing, obviously the voice acting and all that. Jenner is something, man. Well, you told me, I didn't know this, that he was not in the book, or not in the book as much, maybe mentioned.
Right. He's mentioned.
Something.
He died. What is it? He has left the party before they get to the Fitzgibbons place.
Mm-hmm.
And he and whoever went with him tried to steal some kind of electric motor and got electrocuted and killed.
Oh, okay. I like that they, even if it was a Hollywood exec, though he was kind of out on his own, but
he was doing his own thing.
It feels Hollywood movie-y to say we've got to have a villain, right? You don't always have to, but I'm really glad that Jenner's in this movie. He's a great villain.
He's fantastic.
He's awesome.
So, like I said, he's denigrating the plan. He says the Thorn Valley plan is the aspiration of idiots and dreamers. And he turns and he sees Justin and Aegis, and he says, "We were just talking about you," which is an excellent line. Idiots and dreamers, we were just talking about you. And Justin comes back with, "That's refreshing, Jenner. Usually you're screaming about us," which gets a chuckle from the assembled. Right? You talk about commanding the room. Justin does it differently.
Yes, and that's classic politics as well. You'll see that more in like UK Parliament. It's like, oh, talking about us? Normally you're screaming about us. Ah, and then they bang on the table. Got you.
Then he notices Brisby. Who is that? No visitors are allowed here. And Justin says, "May I present Mrs. Jonathan Brisby?" And from the side, Brutus says, "Jonathan Brisby is dead." Brutus, we will learn, is Jenner's sidekick.
Yeah.
So that's obnoxious. Yeah. But it does get the rest of the council to, because I think he thought, oh, she's on Justin's side, so let's immediately discredit her. Brutus did. Yeah. So now we're getting shouts of, "She's not one of us. What is the meaning of this? Send her away. Let's get back to business." And Mrs. Brisby was not prepared to defend herself in the well of the chamber. Right. So she's in no way prepared for this.
She came here looking for one dude to ask about how to help her family out, and now all of a sudden she's in the middle of the Roman Senate,
right, being shouted at for no reason.
Yeah.
But Mr. Aegis knows what to say. He says, "Wait, she has been to see the great owl," and that shuts everybody up. Yeah. Because none of these suckers has ever been to see the great owl.
Right.
He has told her that we could move the Brisby home to safety. Her home was Jonathan's home. So Brutus says a thing here. "We have urgent problems of our own. Let the lower creatures fend for themselves." So back to that
cake.
Yeah, that oligarchy, removed Senate kind of attitude.
Yeah.
We're not a part of that society. Let them deal with their own problems. Now, Jenner sees an opportunity, and he approaches Brutus. And he says, "Hang on a second, my friend." He says, "Maneuvers of this nature are dangerous. Accidents could happen." And Brutus doesn't get it.
Yeah.
So there's an interesting bit of voice acting here where the speaker or whomever says Jenner's name, and then he says it again. Jenner. And I don't know if that was a mistake, if the voice actor only meant to say it once to get his attention, or if they played it twice or what. But it's there's a realism to the voice acting here that is, it's not as polished.
Right.
That I love.
It feels more like a real conversation, like people talking over each other. Like you said, also not quite fully understanding each other. There's body language that's being interpreted, not just the eyebrows. Right, so there's all of that, and I agree. It's something that would become a signature of Don Bluth's stuff, is that those types of things that, even though we've got rats in a secret underground dungeon having these weird plans or whatever, that it feels very real. It feels very... again, so a lot of times in politics, when you have these breaks, if someone's not giving a speech on the floor, there's a lot of crosstalk, a lot of people breaking into smaller groups to have conversations, to politic with each other, to form alliances, to plan things in the future. And it feels very realistic in that way. And I agree. I absolutely love it.
So it's obvious to me as a kid that we should not trust Jenner here.
Sure.
But he approaches Mrs. Brisby, and he says, 1,000 pardons, my dear.
Sure.
Forgive the ill temper of my colleague.
Of course.
Not mine.
No,
I don't
of
need
course.
forgiveness, just
No,
Brutus.
I would never actually apologize.
Not for me.
No.
It would be an honor to assist Jonathan's widow in any way.
Oh.
We are but your humble servants. And he gets on one knee and he takes her hand, and his little goatee is like all goatee. And I think he kisses her hand. And
Yeah. If you're in the fantasy story and someone describes themselves as your humble servant,
right,
do not trust that person immediately.
That dude. Yeah, it's an obvious and immediate turn, and suddenly the room is on her side too. I think a combination of she's seen the great owl, and well, if Jenner's going to back her, the rest of us are going to back her too, obviously.
Right.
So somebody, they know Robert's rules of order, apparently.
Yeah,
I second the motion.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, did
exactly.
Jenner move to whatever?
Yeah.
I don't think Jenner made a motion, whatever. But they, here, the motion has been moved and seconded. Those in favor make a show of hands. So now they're like, in a moment, they got the council, the Senate, whatever it is, to agree to, we're going to figure out how to move the Brisby home.
Right.
And that's Jenner's power. That's Jenner's, 20th level charisma.
Right. Yeah. And sometimes how quickly things can change, and it can be absolutely infuriating when you're somebody who needs the help of your government, and you're like, well, there's a side story somewhere of all the animals who didn't get to go and see the great owl, who didn't have the connects, who didn't get to give their speech on the Senate floor, and their stuff just got bulldozed.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right. So Mr. Aegis lets us know that he's not been fooled. He's up to something, he says. And then he says, well, we'll approach, please take Mrs. Brisby to the library. We'll approach Nicodemus when the meeting is over. We never get to see the library, which is kind of a bummer. But we cut now to Jeremy, who is being tied up by Auntie Shrew. He did not stand a chance. The moment he showed up, he's level 2 and she's level 15 or something.
Right, yeah, just a squire. He's barely gone on any adventures, and he trips and falls on each one so far.
Right. So she's already got she's already got him tied up, and she's continuing to tie him up. And as she moves around, her hat will bounce off her head over and over again, but always land back on her head.
Yeah.
So she's got a magical item there.
Right.
And she is scolding him. Think you can come snooping about, looting and pilfering just when everyone's away? Because remember, most of the field is evacuated. And he says, well, let me explain. Oh, what a lovely hat you're wearing, which is what drew my attention to her hat, which is why I noticed it bouncing around.
Yeah.
She says, don't you sweet talk me. I know you're in league with those awful rats. And he's not supposed to talk about the rats. What rats?
Right.
Hoodlums, the lot of you. Why'd you say rats? You think the world owes you a living, right? So if we talked about the rats as these oligarchs stealing from, the society of the farmers, and giving nothing back. What does that phrase mean? You think the world owes you a living.
Yeah, that seems to, I guess, be a critique of takers, broadly speaking. I guess of people that leech off of society, as it were. Right? And that's a perspective that a lot of people have, right? This idea that anyone who wants, quote, government handouts, or anyone who wants, the people who say there's no such thing as a free lunch, right? Right. This idea that you have to work for and earn everything in your life that you have in some tangible way. And so if we submit that the rats of Nimh are stealing electricity that they did not earn, and that their lifestyle is built around this electricity, their whole society appears to be, right? I guess the suggestion there is that they've stolen a way of life, that they haven't earned their mountain of gold, as it were, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think there's, an interesting, I don't know if Bluth and or whomever were trying to make a larger political argument there. I also think that, a lot of times we tend to go a bit too extreme in our interpretations of art to say, oh, so he's anti this and pro that, where a lot of times I think it's a lot smaller of saying, here are the pros of this, here are the cons of this. And so I don't know. It would be interesting, but I didn't think much of that line at all as a kid. As an adult, I interpreted that to mean that, yeah, she thinks that she looks down on the rats and their society,
right?
Because she thinks they haven't earned what they have.
Right. She sees them as hoodlums. They see themselves as above everyone else.
Right.
She sees them as people who would come in and loot after everyone flees the tractor.
Right.
And I'm not sure that the story even suggests there's a right and a wrong. I do think it suggests that the rats are wrong to steal from the farmers. But other than that, I think it's competing ideologies.
Right.
She says, the sooner you delinquents learn that you must earn your own way, the sooner the better, as she wraps a big piece of cord around his beak and closes it shut, ties it shut.
Right.
He's saying, you can't leave me like this. There's a cat. He's a very big cat, and he might. And she says, good riddance.
Goodness.
So it's
a bit intense.
Yeah, she's sentencing him to death by dragon.
Yeah.
And then she says, Teresa, Martin. It's Martin. That's the name.
Martin. Yes. Remembered it. Got it.
So they come up out of the house, and she says, keep an eye on this hooligan. Make sure he doesn't get away until I can fetch help. And as for you, you black buzzard, I wouldn't try anything. I shall return. And she leaps off the house, and her hat spins up in the air for a moment before dropping down with her.
Yeah.
And Martin immediately says, well, I guess we better untie him. So now we get a scene between the kids and the crow, and Teresa says, but Martin, and he's like, well, Mom helped a crow in the field. Maybe this is him. And Teresa says, he looks like a loony.
Well, also smart.
And he's trying to say,
you're both correct.
They're both correct. And he says, he's trying to say, yeah, that's me. Your mother sent me. And they finally get him untied. They get his beak untied.
Right.
The littlest one, Cynthia, says, he's trying to talk. Calls him the poor turkey. The poor turkey fell down because they leave his legs tied up. So now he's trying to explain, I'm not a turkey. Your mother. And Teresa immediately says, where's our mother? So they're not letting him explain either. But I think you're right about their adventurous nature, and maybe that's why she didn't want them to know where she was.
Yeah.
So he says, he finally gets it out. The rose bush. She's at the rose bush to see the rats.
Good job, Jeremy. The kids broke in like 5 minutes.
Yeah, it took moments. So Teresa says, did you take our mother to see the rats? And Martin says, well, I'm going to go look for her. He says, no, wait, the rats are friendly. Good, tonight, stay. They're coming here to move your house where it's safe. Understand? And the three of them look at him, and he says, the owls said they're good and smart. Got it? And Martin says, you're right. He's a loony.
He's a loony.
And they tie him back up.